Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Marin Poetry Center Reading Series, which is produced in partnership with Mill Valley Library. My name is Amanda Moore, and I'm the events coordinator for Marin Poetry Center. After a summer off, we are thrilled to be back with our third Thursday reading series, which we had hoped to bring back in person, but for the time being, we will continue hosting these readings online with the help of Mill Valley Library. Sign up for our newsletter on our website or for the Mill Valley Library newsletter to be the first to hear the lineup for our fall readings, which include next month's reading on October 21st at 7 p.m. with Danusha Lamaris, whose most recent book, Bonfire Opera, won the Northern California Book Award, and Benjamin Gucciardi, whose debut collection, West Portal, was released this summer and is a real stunner. We're looking forward to this reading, our anthology launch, which will be held in late October or early November, and several other events this fall, and we hope you'll join us. Our readings and offerings are free to the public, but I'd like to urge you to consider becoming a member of the Marin Poetry Center if you aren't already. You can find information on how to join on our website. Members support our community endeavors and fund readings and events such as this. We are a volunteer organization, and the pandemic has stretched our few resources. At the moment, we are in special need of volunteer board members, particularly those who can help with social media, maintaining our website through WordPress, and running our book club, Building Bridges, which last year featured monthly online discussions of books by such luminary poets as Jericho Brown, Victoria Chang, John Murillo, Natalie Diaz, and many others. We need your help to produce and support programming that fosters connection, sparks inclusive dialogue, and celebrates a wide range of poetic voices. Please be in touch if you'd like to learn more. I usually begin these readings, as I will tonight, with an acknowledgement that the Marin Poetry Center operates on the unceded territory of the Coast Miwok, who have been and are the shepherds of the land the stewards of the land we call Marin. And thanks to Zoom, I'm able to host this event from the traditional and unceded lands of the Ohlone and Ramaytush. We honor with gratitude the land itself and all of its ancestors, past, present, and emerging. I am thrilled this evening to welcome two poets whose work I greatly admire and have been lucky to read and learn from. Brian Komei Dempster and Molly Spencer are poets of place and of relationships. Their poetic lens trained histories and regions as comfortably as they are on the terrors and joys of domesticity and parenthood. I will introduce Brian first and will pop back after his reading to introduce Molly. The chat is open for your appreciation of their work during the readings, and you can post questions in the Q&A section that I'll present to them toward the end of the hour when we'll engage in a short conversation. We'll also be posting links to our bookshop in the chat, so you have easy access to their books for purchase to further savor their words after tonight. I first came to Brian Komei Dempster's work while developing a unit for my high school students on Japanese American internment during World War II. His collection, Topaz, offers a contemporary speaker reflecting on the experiences of his family. These poems were my class's Virgil-like guides through a painful ancestral history many of us otherwise had no access to. His follow-up to Topaz, this year's Fantastic Seas, which was also published by Four Way Books, again mediates experience through family, exploring, among others, the primary relationship between a father and his physically and cognitively challenged son. This son, who I first met in the opening lines of Topaz's Temple Bell lesson, "Son, I am weighted, you are light," is the magical ingredient of Seas, its muse and its power, the subject of an immense and achingly tender attention. Seas was the winner of the Julie Suk Award, an NCPA Gold Award in Poetry, a silver winner of the Human Relations Indie Book Award, and a finalist for the Eric Hoffer Award and National Indie Excellence Award in Poetry. His poems have been published in a wide array of literary journals, including New England Review, North American Review, and Tri-Quarterly. In addition to his poetry, Brian is the editor of From Our Side of the Fence, Growing Up in America's Concentration Camps, and Making Home from War, Stories of Japanese American Exile and Resettlement. Brian Komei Dempster is a professor of rhetoric and language and a faculty member in the Asian Pacific American Studies at the University of San Francisco, where he received the Distinguished Teaching Award in 2010. Currently, he divides his time between teaching and serving as Director of Administration for the Master of Arts in Asia Pacific Studies. Please welcome Brian Komei Dempster.
What a lovely introduction. Amanda, I'm truly moved by that. Thank you so much. And thank you to the Marin Poetry Center and Mill Valley Library for hosting us, for Julianne, who's behind the scenes, and Franklin, who's also behind the scenes. It's an honor to be reading for this series. I originally read with MPC with Jody Hotel, who's in the audience. I think it was in 2015. I also want to give a shout out to my friend Connie Post, who I saw in the chat, and my parents, who are on like a 16 reading streak, I think, and they refuse for that to be broken. So love to you and everyone else that's here. Very delighted to be reading with Molly and hearing her. So we're first going to start with just a few slides for context, and I know Julianne is going to put those up for you. And just wanted you to be able to see the cover. This is my mother, Renko Ishida Dempster. Her artist name is Sui Ren. And we went through many, many of her paintings before settling on this one. And I hope if you just look at that for a few moments, you can see what it intuitively evokes for you. Is it a forest? Is it blood? Is it a seizure? Is it a face? In any case, I hope that those images resonate with the poems I'll read tonight. And the next slide is when my hair was a little bit darker, but not too much so. And I'm sitting with my son, Brendan, when he's very young. I'd estimate sometime in the first year of his life. This was before, as I recall, we knew about his diagnosis. And that's me and him sitting there in our cabin in Sonoma County, which tragically burned last year. And I want to memorialize and pay homage to that and to my relationship with Brendan. And the next photo is, some of you here may be residents of Marin County. If you look closely at that hospital gown, it says Marin General Hospital. And my partner, Grace, and I have spent many nights there, especially in his younger years, going to that hospital and others. Brendan, as Amanda was mentioning, has cognitive challenges. He has epilepsy. He's nonverbal. He has cerebral palsy. He's also the wisest and most beautiful soul that I've come into contact with. But this is him when he's younger. He's now 16 years old. So as I read the poems, I just wanted you to have some sort of image and picture of him, because the book really is in homage to him and in admiration of him. So I'm going to begin with looking at the time here. I'm going to begin with the opening poem. And I came across these drawings. I don't know. I hope you can see them. They aren't drawings he does completely on his own. His one-on-one aid helps him. But I just want to read this to you before I read the opening poem. Dear Mom and Dad, the week the title of the newspaper was Geminid Meteor Shower, I learned about a place called the sky. I had fun making a solar system, a new recipe called night stars. I learned 4 new words: meteor shower, night, sky, meteor. My favorite part of the paper was the story from Brendan. And here's a drawing that goes with that, done in concert with his amazing aide. And I'll read you the opening poem, Night Sky. At his birth, I held my son against stars, charted the climb, his flag among stars. A jagged pulse shook our space, his mind a blizzard of stars. I keep it quiet how he sees earth crooked, his words buried stars. So, as Amanda gracefully mentioned in her introduction, my work attempts to converge the historical and the familial, the past and the present. And in this book, I wanted you to get a taste of how some of those themes interact. So this poem, Seized, which is later in the opening section, is really, and it happened organically, but I was writing one day about my son's seizures, and I started to think about my mother's historical seizure in Topaz camp. And this is what resulted. So that's the main context you need to know. And my mother's name, Renko, she's the one who did the drawing of the book I told you about earlier, the painting. It's called Seized, S-E-I-Z-E-D. By day, by night, in handcuffs, through mind scramble, brain surged, shock of force, body taut, alerted, taken, outside, inside, anytime, any place, no words to explain. My infant mother, 1942, my young son now, the rug, his twisted body, his world inside, and what it does, red flare or white lightning, fried impulse or smoldering heat, a searing of gray or glitter of stars veiled by fog, her fragments, yellow orb, the porch light, shimmer against her face, the cradle, her mother's arms, a blanket's false cover, itch of wool, hives on skin, things just happen, by bus, by train, in war, electric storms, a horse stable, desert, sand swirl and mind gust, thought sparks, word cloudings, mountains spike against white. A guard's boot, trodden syllable, a thorned cage, wing pierced, baby hawk and wire, my barbed string of words, to capture him, capture her. If he never speaks, I carry him. If she cries for her father, grandmother carries her. Someplace, my mother carries what is unremembered, begins to know when I ask. I don't speak of things I can't know, of despair about my son. We never know where we are going, where love will end us. So, you know, there's the silence of the past, the silences of my son, and then his own languages that he has. His language emerges through touch, through eye contact, through body language. In any case, I also want to give a shout out to my amazing wife, Grace. And as the book emerges, as it sort of goes through the journey, the arc, the trajectory, I try to really be honest and authentic about how this impacts the marriage and how it both tests it, but also how it strengthens it. So in the third section of the book, there's a poem I wanted to share with you called Broken. And this poem really, to me, resonates with that third photo of him wearing the hospital gown. That photo reminds me so much of what happens in this particular poem. Broken. The park below gives us fire, orange leaves crackling over green. I gulped coffee as I drove. Grace held the cold cloth on his head. I do, he babbled his mantra. Our mouths chalked, minds chipped and torn away. He never gets better, I said. Her lips tighten. That doesn't help us. Back to our corners. Another night in Enar. 2 bags of fluids through our 8-year-old son. A flock sweeps over, shadows the flame, spiking mercury, the night cracked into ice chips, his skin paling, seizing stopped. Some couples like us end up broken, Grace says, rubs my back. Not us, I tell her, my hand on his chest as he sleeps. Through the window, I see kids swinging into the sky, gulls rising, wings white as Brendan's shirt, the silk of Grace's gown. The long field flickering, she leans against me, our forms resting with his in glass. A whole life of I do. Next poem I'm going to read, one thing that was very challenging about the book was figuring out what to include and what not to. And ultimately, I decided that my son's journey, the father-son quest, needed to go outside of not just, the Japanese American experience, but into other issues of racial violence, of homophobic violence, of things that I thought were forms of seizure that had happened. So that seizure becomes a metaphor for really being marginalized, being othered. So this poem, many of you are probably familiar with Matthew Shepard, who was fatally murdered it was 1998. And this poem is for him. It's after Psalm 23 called Shepherd Psalm. Prepare for enemies. Warm your feet from dirt's grave cold. Uncover your voice. The words flying out like leaves into gusts of their rage. Dissolve the fist stain on your face and the rope around your wrists. Lie down in the beaten dark, near pastures green and unbruised, the salt raining down your blood, restoring dusk's ragged edge to smooth plains of terracotta slate, your gold straw hair igniting the wick of pink dawn. You shall not want. So I would say the journey of the book is a father's attempt to come to terms with his son, but then beyond that, to not just understand his son, but to then appreciate the son's depth and complexity, which is non-normative, which is, not typical. And the son is sort of like a prism through which the father views his own identity and the world. So I thought it was really important, and I'm going to move to the final section, read a few poems to close here. I thought it was really important for the reader to get a sense of resolution, even if it's a complicated resolution. And so the final section is hopefully sending that note of reconciliation to the reader. And I'll read a few poems to close. I'm going to read a Brendan poem too. So it's going to be 2 poems from me and then 1 from him to close. So this poem is just called Hi. And in Japanese, hi means yes. My grandmother always used to say, hi, hi, hi on the phone. I said, Mom, what is grandma saying? Oba-chan, hi, hi, hi. Why she keeps saying hello? I was like, no, she's saying yes. But then my son, Brendan, it became part of his own language. He said hi. He says hi all the time among his, unique words or sounds or whatever they are. So I had to write this poem. And when I say hi, it's H-A-I, hi. Look, a bird, mountain, the sky, so long. Blue is where you go to the sun. So this is the poem that I imagine my son Brendan would write. I have to admit that I wrote the poem, but I really think I summoned his voice into this poem. My son loves recycling. He's a master of it. He takes these cardboard boxes and lifts the plastic lid, drops it in. He's so proud of himself. But then I thought, climate change, environmental destruction, there's something beautiful about that. So I wrote this poem by Brendan. It's called Recycling. I love to go back and forth, renew the world. Thank you, Brendan. Okay. So I'd like to close with this poem. And this is based on true events. I didn't make this up, I promise. And because of that, this miraculous occurrence, I had to write about it. And it happened, I'm in the North Bay, and several years ago, before the pandemic, it was flooding, water everywhere, tires half covered, and it was Brendan's birthday. And we're sitting at the table together, and this is the story of what happened. Brendan's I am. A close flash, quick torrent, the sounding near. It happened in time. The path deepened, water reached the house. Our son, 14, walked alone to his blue stroller chair. Wheels locked, we strapped him in, his body still as Buddha beneath the tree. I steadied the bowl. Grace raised the spoon of broth to his lips. Her words, Brendan, we just want you to have a happy life. Silver touches his tongue. 2 syllables gush from his mouth. Rain gathers, our eyes close. The current flows through us. His first real sentence, I am. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Brian, for humanizing this Zoom space and offering us those words. Thank you. I'll let it settle for a second. And then I'd like to introduce Molly Spencer. I first met Molly Spencer in a workshop held in Ellen Bass's living room, and I instantly knew I wanted to befriend this woman with a blue streak in her hair and a bumper sticker on her tattered minivan that professed a love for Austen's Mr. Darcy. I was ready to become her most ardent fan and reader, however, when we then workshopped a poem called Frank Next Door, which you'll find in her book, If the House. And it's like so much of Molly's work in that it manages to be both transcendent and earthbound, humorous and rending, highly crafted and invitingly conversational, all at the same time. To read Molly's work, for me, is to pull up a chair in the Midwestern living room of a brilliant, beloved friend and hear her thoughtful disclosures on family, marriage, landscape, architecture, poetics, art. But it's also like kneeling in a chapel and feeling overwhelmed by and grateful for an inspiring, otherworldly force. In addition to writing poetry, Molly is an incredibly insightful critic and editor. My work wouldn't exist without hers. She's also a writing instructor in the classroom and online. We've hosted some of her workshops at Marin Poetry Center, and they're beloved. She teaches within institutions and within living rooms and kitchens on Zoom. Her debut collection, which ironically was her second completed manuscript, If the House, won the 2019 Brittingham Prize, judged by Carl Phillips. Her second collection, Hinge, won the Crab Orchard Open competition. Her recent poetry has appeared in Blackbird, Copper Nickel, Field, the Georgia Review, Gettysburg Review, New England Review, Ploughshares, and Prairie Schooner. Her critical writing and essays have appeared at Colorado Review, the Georgia Review, Kenyon Review Online, Literary Hub, the Writer's Chronicle, and the Rumpus, where she is a senior poetry editor. Molly holds an MFA from the Rainier Writers Workshop and an MFA from the an MPA from the School of International and Public Affairs at Columbia University. She teaches writing at the University of Michigan's Gerald R. Ford School of Public Policy. Welcome, Molly.
Thank you so much, Amanda, for that beautiful introduction and the walk down memory lane of that workshop in Ellen's living room. I remember feeling the same. We workshopped a poem that you had written about surfing that day. And I thought, I need to know this poet. So I am just so happy to be here tonight. So honored to read with Brian and in the presence of his beautiful and poignant words about his son and about life. I'm grateful to the Mill Valley Library and Julianne for staffing this and making sure everything goes okay behind the scenes, and to the Marin Poetry Center, and of course to Amanda. I'm really thrilled to see some dear friends in the chat. Hello, Barbara Berman. Hello, Connie Post. Hello, Kelly Crescio Miller. I am actually zooming in tonight from the Detroit area in Michigan, but I did live on the peninsula for several years and made wonderful friends there. And every day I feel the pull of the West Coast and my beloveds there on my rib cage. So it is lovely, lovely to see some old friends in the chat. Thank you for being here. I am going to read tonight a few poems from Hinge, which, as Amanda said, was my second book, but was the first one I wrote. And then I'm going to both indulge and terrify myself by reading some new work. And I think I'm going to have to squeeze in Frank Next Door since Amanda mentioned it. Hinge is a book that chronicles, amongst other things, my experience of being quite seriously ill and raising young children, and eventually getting a diagnosis of lupus, which is a chronic autoimmune condition, and kind of negotiating the suffering of that while still trying to find beauty and joy in the world. And I think partly because it is in response to such an archetypal experience, that of suffering, it borrows a lot from the stories that are archetypal in our culture. So Greek myth and fairy tale and legend and those kinds of things. So to get started with a poem from Hinge, this is one that borrows from Greek myth, and it is written in the voice of Persephone to her mother Demeter. And they are the mother and daughter of the myth about why we have winter. And it's, of course, because Persephone was, shall we say, kidnapped or abducted by Hades and brought to the underworld. And during that time, Demeter, who is the goddess of the harvest and of growing things, was grieving so harshly that the world, kind of the vegetation of the world died. Anyway, this is Persephone since she kept asking. I gave her an answer, chose a window with a view of rough country, said oak, said aster, piled up lies in her warm brown eyes. What can she know of the word crawl space, of the choiring black birds that nest in my hair? Look out the window, Mom. The bright moss is my sash as it tore, the bone white road, remnant press of my spine. The far smoke is my father's slight amendment. Blue mountain, torn rind of my heart, and there, in the middle distance, near the house that kneels praying on the hillside, he is the black horse, barely rendered. I am the open door. One of the things that I learned kind of early in my experience of lupus is that the word is from the Latin word for wolf. Of course, as a poet, that introduced all kinds of possibilities to me. And this is a poem that remembers the girl and the body that was before illness took hold. It's called How to Lure the Wolf. Tenderly, the slender bow of innocence lifts. Nothing unknown can be known. The hum of not knowing you're lucky in life swells like whole rivers and flows past the window glass across the field where he watches you, as those on a long road gaze at a waiting house, knowing it's home. So many future hallways of blood and bone to prowl down, your cheeks so deliciously pale. In one legend, the wolf fears the sound of bow on string. In another, the rich saw and thrum resemble his dreams, a mother who used to sing Clementine, that season of milk and denning. That you dream too means nothing to him, that you sleep curled and fetal in your bed. If it were night and he were hungry, he'd thrust his muzzle starward and howl the pain into your limbs. But it's morning. You're reaching for pages, shuffling for just the right song, clean opening note, something andante, no rush. He paws at the first shoots now breaking through. His eyes prefer a thicket for framing, but the window will do, and the lure of music, and your unearned body, still so supple, so blank. This next poem, I have to give credit to my daughter. Ages and ages ago, she's 15 now, about to be 16. And I think when she was not quite 3, I was driving, picked her up from preschool and was driving her home. And she said, Mama, from the back. And I said, yes, Laura. She said, are you a lady or a bird or a witch? And I thought, wow, what a question. I thought, I'm filing that away for a poem someday. And I did. And actually, many years later, wrote the poem. And here it is. It's called Girl with House and Lost Boys. And it's kind of about that moment where one day you wake up and you're 35 and you have these 3 little children who are depending on you. And you wonder, how did this happen? That wild night flight, second to the right, straight on till morning, through a spangled sky flecked with fairies who you still thought were all good. Then the first look at the island, unknown and yet known, Neverland. Your heart in your throat, for soon there would be campfires and mermaids and little lost boys. Even the kiss, or was it a button that saved your life when the arrow struck and the rust of blood in your mouth didn't alert you? and then their grief and whispers, their joy at the mere fluttering of your hand and the house they built up all around you. This was before you woke from your faint and remembered. You were only a girl with no experience. Except this time you did grow up, and now you must decide. Will you be a lady or a bird or a witch? Look, the sky grows grim, snow is falling. And listen, all the lost boys are waiting outside, shivering, asking, where's our dinner? Tapping on the windows, calling, wake up, wake up. I'll just read one last poem from Hinge. This one is called Love Poem for Lupus. If there is a poem of acceptance in Hinge, this is it. And it borrows lines from several different versions of Little Red Riding Hood. This is Love Poem for Lupus. There's always a house alone in the wood. 3 oaks to mark the place, a hazel hedge. The roof is a slanted pledge. I've worn the pelt of forest shade. I've worn my little hood of red. The path is aching with thaw. When I find the house alone in the wood, I'm always a tender young thing. Grandmother's dead 6 years. There is sorrow, birds in winter plume, salt for the deer to nose. There are children with voices bright as coins. The tall bent steps. The wolf raised the latch and the door swung wide open years ago now. There may be a fire with hands for flames. There may be a witch, an oven stoked. Surely a bed laid down for me. A rug at the hearth where the wolf sleeps, the tick, tick, tick of his heart. I know how to dread him. Dread like a tripwire, dread like thirst. I've ungloved my hands, eaten the cakes, drunk the wine. The huntsman is otherwise occupied. Here is the only place. I wake every day in this story. Call in the children, open wide this breakable body, this hard-won room, this house of luck and bone that made us. Okay, I'm going to read some poems from my latest manuscript that I'm just finishing, I think. And these poems are from a series called Invitatory. I am what they call a fallen away Catholic. I was raised in a devout Catholic household. I no longer kind of keep to that, but I am still very formed by the liturgy and the language and the calendar of the church year and some of its rituals, including its daily prayer. And the Invitatory is the first psalm of morning prayer in the Catholic liturgy of the hours. It's from the Latin word for invitation. And these poems, again, are from a series named Invitatory. And one of the ideas of this manuscript is that no life is separate from either its own kind of internal self or from the world, and that we are invited into both lives, that of the interior and that where we must engage in this world that quakes and burns and seems to be pulling apart at its seams. So these are from Invitatory. Considering our momentary nearness to Jupiter. Considering the vast abiding glint of stars spilled through the skies above the small boats of our lives, and the planet we can't find but know is there, the size of 10 Earths, because it pulls on everything. Field and edge of field, light and wingbone, the far stones of other moons, something dropped in the night. Considering the moon's indifferent grip on the snarled sea and the fraught raft into which a father lowers his child, a slender prayer, shoreless in his mouth, have mercy. the green, untroubled heave of waves, considering all the words forgone. You ask me how I am. If I said sand in the spine of a book, if I said bone set come into your roadside, early meadow rue desiring damp shade at wood's edge and stillness hanging its slow sepals down, petalless, untouched, sometimes called two houses. In the night, 3 miles of land has been reclaimed, then lost again in the pooled blue of a cloak draped over a corner chair. In the night, a woman bleeds through a line on the map saying hush to the child on her back. Or is that rain finally in its thin voice? The sky kneeling down in the fields at last to glean. And the floods drape over fields and lifetimes end of winter. And the gunman kills 50 at prayer while we sleep. And here beneath this latest, most tenuous roof, I am eyeing the door. I am abandoning them slowly, their delible skin, their 6 blue eyes in all. What I mean is that their cries tug at my ribs only loosely now, that my eyes are cast far off. Now 39 found dead in a refrigerated truck. A child in a cage, 1,000 children in 1,000 cages. This is the world I brought them to by way of my own bleak body, ladder of. World of stone and churning, waters, fire at the rim, shackle and hunger, each bridge, a tremble. Only world I had to give, swerve in the road where the tree once stood. And this is time and time passing, all those times I looked at them in the rear view and said, no more questions for a while. By now, they must know there is a bird who lays her eggs in another bird's nest, then flies off to follow her hunger. You ask me, are you happy? Mornings, I read and get some words down, as I have always done. Sundays, I fill the lamps with oil, another week's light. Though quiet, I am not indifferent, not seen through, not sure, awaiting. I parse again this distance, light on a slow river. I have not forgotten how tenderly you unpinned my hair. Okay, it's time for Frank. Frank is a bit of a lighter note, you might be happy to hear. And that'll be it for me tonight, so thank you. This is Frank Next Door, and it actually is written about my neighbor in Mountain View, California, Frank, who one summer tore out this was before the drought, tore out his grass and worked very assiduously at it. It's called Frank Next Door, and you'll notice some borrowings both from the Bible and from Shakespeare. The dishes are done, the counter wiped, the children are all at school. The window is open to a mild morning breeze, construction noise, the many wars and storms that pound the earth. But what I need to know, Frank Next Door, is why have you torn out your lawn? Also, am I my neighbor's keeper? And why do we now say 3 times instead of thrice, as in thrice you have bent your 89 years, you're stooped back over the same tired patch of grass between our houses. 3 times you have pulled it out by hand. Frank, I'm up early. I know it's you I hear at 6 a.m. with the scritch of your rake and the occasional hollow thunk of one of my boys' balls that you've thrown back over to our side of the fence. Thank you, Frank. But can I ask, why did you not stop with the grass? Why have you tipped and unpotted all your leggy geraniums, which I had come to admire for their infrequent orange blooms? Was it you who came upon Ophelia sewing? Fierce and uncertain, your shirt unbuttoned, hair raised like a sail from sleep or madness. And Frank, how is Barbara? It's been months since I've seen her on your porch in her blue house dress. Do you know, Frank, how hard it is to explain the concept of house dress to today's kids? I confess I believed myself up to the task. I of sweep and mop, I of apron, of the homemade cupcakes I brought to my daughter's class, about which a little girl asked, "Can't you afford real cupcakes?" Of house dress, I explained, a simple garment, a row of buttons, often faded. Never mind. But Frank, about your camellia, that too, despite its great red eyes that open twice a year, Frank, the glossy leaves, the smooth layered buds before they flower, how fastened they are, how pleasing in their closedness. And what means this, my neighbor, that you have left the bindweed climbing over our shared fence? That squatter, that stowaway creeper has staked its claim as the worst weed in California. Frank, what I'm asking is, are you shuffling off your mortal coil? Should I start bringing casseroles? Is it so long a life? Did you know it's also called creeping Jenny, bellbind, sheepbind, and cornbind? Don't you love such words? Frank next door, is it wrong for me to find the bindweed oddly beautiful? Its scrawny persistence, all its trailing arms and legs, the weak white faces of its blooms as they open to show a curved swirl of blood at their throats. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Molly. Thank you for reading that poem and for sharing your new work. I want to remind everyone that in the Q&A section, you can post any questions you have, although I am going to claim my privilege, I guess, of being the only person with the mic and ask one first. In bringing Molly and Brian together, I was really interested in many convergences of their work, talking about the body, talking about illness and parenthood. But what I want to talk about is parenthood and writing. In a lovely essay called Against the Muse, Molly writes, "I don't write in a trance or a sacred space. I write in the orthodontist's waiting room. I write in the car in the ballet studio parking lot. I write in the splinters of time I can find amid my obligations." And Brian tonight has shared with us just what it was like so many times to balance caring for a son and writing poetry. So I want to hear from both of you about what your writing process is like, how it works with your family, how it both draws from or maybe takes away from your family, wherever you want to take that conversation. And while you answer, I'm sure other people will have some questions that they can put in the Q&A.
Brian, I'd love to hear from you first.
Okay. That's a great question. And I loved what Molly said, actually. That was really beautiful. I would point to the crafting of this particular book. It took about 14 years. And I would say the first stage was one of necessity. And I do think that's a motivating factor in terms of finding the time when you feel that urgency and necessity. So the first drafts of the poems and Seas were very much, it wasn't like I sat down each week and thought I need to write these. It was more emotional processing of the experience. And so it happened in journaling. It happened probably daily and involuntarily, fits of writing and drafts that were somewhat therapeutic, venting onto a page. And then I think, and this is similar to Topaz too, that after the first drafting process, realizing that there were some jewels in there, but there was a lot of emotion and melodrama and abstraction that had to be cut. And so I'd say the second phase, when you're actually shaping the book, for me, it's more ritualized. I try to, Friday through Mondays, having an academic schedule, try to carve out spaces of time. And I do find that it's lifeblood, that it's sustaining to have that creative work, that ritual, whether it's 3 to 4 hours, whether it's the splinters of time that Molly mentioned. But I do think that it really is important for a sense of, do you hear the dog? Do you hear the child in the background? It's so perfect. So, but I think it is really important when you return to that work, when you return to the family responsibility, the sense of creating, of processing, of documenting, I think actually makes real life more understood, more easy to enter. And so I see the two as very interactive: family life, writing. And I try to have a structure, but I also try to honor inspiration, intuition, and those fits where you can go really, really, really hard and fast for a whole month as you finish up a manuscript or a poem, and then be cool with taking 2 weeks off if you have family emergencies. So those are my thoughts, not quite as poetic as what Molly said so beautifully in the interview, but I think overlapping. So what do you think, Molly?
Well, I'm actually in a new phase of life right now, different from when I wrote either of these books and different from when I wrote that essay. My nest is now emptying. My two oldest children, 20 and 18, my sons are away at school. And now it's just me and my youngest, who's, about, as I said, about to be 16. And she, on the weekends, she'll sleep until noon. In the morning, she's gone by 7 to go to school. I did, for a very long time when they were little, get up very, very early in the morning to ensure that I had some time to write. Both because I wanted to prioritize my writing life, but also because I was so crabby if I didn't get that time, So I was a better mother if I was making sure to devote some time to my writing life. And I knew that I could mess up poetry and it wouldn't matter at all and no one would care. And I also knew that I could not mess up being a mom. So carving out the time for my creative life was both out of a desire to have a creative life, but it was also out of a recognition that I would really wreck motherhood if I didn't take that time and devote that time to something that was only mine and just mine in the world, that life of my own. Now it's much easier, and I still do get up in the morning. I still am a better person, a better mother, a better teacher, a better friend, a better daughter, sister, if I make sure to have my writing time in the morning. But I am also much more comfortable and maybe just seasoned or maybe just worn down by the fact that, life can interrupt. Things happen. And I'm much more at peace now than I used to be when I was writing the first 2 books about, if I don't get that time, or if I have that time, but I'm not actually writing, I'm just mostly reading and thinking, that's much more okay to me now. I like to think that that's a sign of personal growth, but I don't know if it is.
Great, thank you both. We have one more question and then we'll close for the evening. This is from Connie Post, who I think you both know. How has the pandemic affected your writing process and also your poems? So in the same vein of writing practice.
Hey, Connie. So good to have you here. Connie's a great poet. You got to check out her work. The pandemic is like, what, 18 plus months now? I've lost track. I think that's right. I think that on the positive side, if I could dichotomize it, I would say that it's made me be more reflective and interior out of necessity, and that it's really made me pay attention to my son and my family just through so much interaction with them. And so I guess I would say for writing, it's made me slow down and be more attentive to detail, to time, to just observing. I think from a more practical, challenging standpoint, at times it's been claustrophobic in our house, and that's no judgment against my son or my family, but just being in an enclosed space. I'm sure many can relate to just not having the physical space, and by extension, sometimes the spiritual space or bandwidth to write poems. And like Brendan was not in school for many months. And so even if I had interior percolations, they could not be expressed on paper on a regular basis. So, I think that one way I've handled it is similar to what Molly was just saying, is relaxing into it and not putting so much pressure on oneself to produce during this time. And to also think that, the experience itself will yield work down the road. And I do like what Molly said about the notion of poems are so important to us and art is so important to us. At the same time, though, life and survival during the pandemic has become the number one priority, safety. And so in that sense, it's realigned that sense of purpose of what life means and put art into a sort of context for me. So those are I hope that helps, Connie. I know you and I have talked a lot in the last year and a half, but that's what comes to mind for me. How about you, Molly?
Well, I have to say that the pandemic has not affected my writing practice very much at all. And not to make light of something as painful and difficult as divorce, but I have said more than once since this pandemic struck that the best thing I ever did was get divorced before the pandemic. So that I actually have not had the experience that many of you have had of being in your house with your entire family all the time, because my kids go to their dads sometimes. And so I have continued to have days and weekends of solitude. And I have continued with my morning writing practice. It's to the point now I've been doing it long enough that it's like brushing my teeth. And that doesn't mean that I'm always producing amazing poems. And there were definitely times in the pandemic where I wasn't doing a ton of new writing, but there were also times when I was writing new poems. I was working on this manuscript. And I guess, I feel pretty fortunate actually that the pandemic has not been as kind of jarring or disruptive to my routine as it might have been if my family were still intact, and that it has, and as it has been for a lot of other people. And I have to say too that while kind of learning how to teach via Zoom and kind of redesigning all of my courses for that format was extremely time intensive and stressful. Not having to commute and lug my body and laptop and books across campus to my office from the parking structure and all that, that actually bought me some time. And so it was, if we're trying to find some good in the pandemic, that's one of the good things for me, is that I just had I had a bit of an easier time, both physically and in terms of capturing that time that I once spent, commuting and running kids to all of their activities, which of course were canceled during the pandemic, et cetera. So I've tried to be grateful for those pieces of the pandemic, even though it's been an incredibly scary time for me as a person with chronic illness and with elderly parents and with nieces and nephews who are too young to be vaccinated. And so, yeah, Brian, I don't know if it's a dichotomy for us to look at the good and the bad. I think it's, human nature. And I've just tried to be grateful for the ways that the pandemic has actually supported my writing rather than made it more difficult.
Thank you both for your answers and for your poems in conversation with one another. I'm going to spend a lot of time treasuring the words that I've heard tonight. So thank you all for joining us. And we'll see you back here, hopefully October 21st for Danusha Lamaris and Benjamin Gucciardi. And if you want to relive this amazing reading, it will be posted on the Mill Valley Library YouTube page shortly. Thank you so much, everyone. Have a lovely evening.
Gratitude to everyone. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.